to the Weekly Defence Podcast, the show about defence procurement, military technology, and the industry that gets the kit into the hands of the warfighter. We are brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Nammo. I'm your host Helen Haxall, Air Domain Editor here at Shephard Media, and I'm coming to you from our global headquarters in a gloomy West London. On the show this week, our Deputy Land Editor Beth Maundrell speaks to Lockheed Martin UK about their new Skykeeper battle management and surveillance system for ground-based air defence. I will be speaking to our air domain reporter Tim Martin about last week's ADECS event in Singapore and the security concerns that were highlighted at the event. And our sponsor Nammo provides this week's Industry Voice segment. But first, our weekly news roundup, and I'm here with Richard Thomas, Editor-in-Chief.
Hello again.
And Beth Maundrell, Deputy Editor Land.
Hiya, Helen.
To talk about what's caught their eye this week. Beth, what's been the main happenings in the land domain?
So this week's been an interesting week with news coming from the US regarding the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle Program. Now, Scott Gawley, our SOF editor who's based out in California, reported that the full rate production contract, which was due in December 2018, is now likely to be postponed for 6 to 12 months. Now, I think it's more likely to be the 6 months, as sources have mentioned that a contract could now be awarded in spring 2019. Now, it's likely that the delay to the contract award is because of some issues during testing, which have only just come to light in the public anyway, via a DOT and E report, which was released last week. The report raised questions about the vehicle's performance during its MOT and E phase, which was completed in May 2018 at Marine Corps Base 29 Palms in California. Now, the issues that have been uncovered during the testing by the end user, so this is when the US Army and the US Marine Corps took the vehicle out for a spin, focus on things such as visibility and cabin noise. Now, regarding visibility, one of the key things that Scott was able to report on was that users found that the rear window to the vehicle was a little bit too small for their liking and
So they couldn't see behind them?
Yeah, so essentially they found that the size of the window could impact the situational awareness from the vehicle. Now,
That seems quite fundamental.
yeah, well, what's worth noting actually is that the issues that have been reported in the DOT and E report are not issues that mean that Oshkosh, the vehicle manufacturer, didn't meet the requirements of the contract. It did. So these are issues that are on top of and outside of those contract requirements. It seems like some of them are quite easy fixes, and the company has said that the feedback from the testing has already been incorporated into the JLTV.
What about, sorry to interrupt, so what about impact for non-US customers, UK, for example?
Well, yeah, so that will be something that we're going to continue to follow. So the UK, for instance, has selected the JLTV as part of its British Army vehicle programme. And they're essentially waiting for that full rate production decision to be made so that they can then carry on with their FMS process and eventually sign a formal contract and start acquiring the vehicles. Now, whether the delay in the FRP will have a knock-on effect and maybe cause some issues for potential export customers, that's still to be determined.
Richard, what's the devil in the detail for the deep blue sea this week?
Oh, I like that. It's very good. Okay, so I'm going to follow a similar format to last week. Don't blame me. I don't make the news. I just follow it. So what we've got is a story from Eastern Europe and a story from the US. In Eastern Europe, first, we've got one from Mikhail Jurocky in Warsaw, and this is about one of the newest Polish OPVs that's undergoing its final sea trials ahead of its handover to the service, obviously the Polish Navy. It's the final leg of a near 4-month-long test program. Previous sea trials tested the combat capabilities, firing of the 76mm Otto Malara, for example. So this final phase will basically put everything together and test it during day and night operations and exercises.
So what's the significance of this for the Polish Navy overall?
Yeah, good question. The significance, I think we can draw into the ongoing modernisation efforts by the Polish Navy to bring newer and larger platforms into its fleet. So obviously it already operates a couple of Oliver Hazard-Perry class guided missile frigates, but with these new OPVs, it looks like it's taking a lot more care and attention over its operations in maritime security and EZ. For the US, of course, we couldn't basically talk about any kind of Navy news without talking about the US Navy. So the US Navy has given a $15 billion contract to Huntston Ingalls Industries for the manufacture of the third and fourth Ford-class aircraft carriers. So that's a bulk buy, of course. Now, the US Navy is expecting to save about $4 billion buying in bulk comparing to buying individually. So the bulk buy for the two vessels is $15 billion for the two. But when you consider, when you add in GFE, government-furnished equipment, that's about $24 billion for the two carriers.
Well, that seems like a huge amount of money when you compare it to other nations that have recently bought aircraft carriers and bought a small amount, so just 2 for the UK, and the cost of those compared to the expanding fleet of carriers the US Navy is investing in.
Sure, it is a huge amount of money. It's more than some defence budgets, of course. No, if you think that the US Navy is spending $12 billion for a couple of carriers, and you think that obviously the Royal Navy, the UK Royal Navy, comparatively has spent not that much on getting its Queen Elizabeth class carriers into service. Yeah, there's question marks over the amount of money that the US Navy is spending on these platforms, considering some of the ongoing issues about some of the technology and the immaturity with systems such as emails. Yeah, it's a lot of money to spend on platforms that aren't necessarily proven just yet. But we'll obviously follow the programme and keep you updated. Helen, what's going on in the skies?
Thanks, Richard. Not a lot at the moment. However, the Indian Air Force is set to receive 15 CH-47F Chinook helicopters from Boeing, and the first was formally handed over during a ceremony in the United States on the 1st of February. Now, the multi-role Chinook helicopter will replace 3 aging Mi-26 heavy-lift helicopters, which are currently flown by the Indian Air Force. One of the roles will be supporting army operations along India's mountainous borders. Something also of note with the Indian Air Force is the service is also waiting delivery of its first AH-64E Apache Guardian helicopters, also from Boeing. So that's something I'm definitely interested to follow up on when I go to Bangalore for Aero India in a couple of weeks. Now, the government in August 2017 cleared the purchase of 6 further Echo model Apaches, this time for the Indian Army, but the Army and Air Force have been competing for the right to fly the Apache fleet, and it is possible that up to 30 additional Apaches could be obtained by the Army in the future. Thank you, Beth.
No problem.
And thank you, Richard.
Yep, welcome.
I'm here with Matt Smith, who is our Director of Analysis here at Shephard Media. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Helen.
Your team and you have been working furiously over the past several months on our Shephard Plus business intelligence service. So, for the benefit of our listeners, Matt, could you just tell us a bit of what exactly is Shephard Plus?
Sure thing, Helen. So, Shephard Plus is it's a market intelligence tool used for the defence and aerospace industry. Its main element is a database of military equipment, but it also includes news and analysis that we bring in from the Shephard journalists and subject matter experts. It's available through a web portal, and all of the data we put in is fully searchable and can be exported into Excel for further analysis.
So what kind of information exactly is available, Matt, and how is the Plus tool used by subscribers?
So our database provides information on who is buying which military equipment. That's the core of it. Each record contains information on order and delivery numbers, unit costs, and product attributes. Our clients use Shephard Plus really to identify market opportunities, to track and assess their competitors, and benchmark their own analysis.
So what can we expect from Shephard Plus in 2019 in terms of further developments and upgrades to the system?
So we're shortly going to add a naval warfare module, and we plan to expand our coverage further to include combat aircraft. We're also developing a programs module, which will cover unawarded procurement programs, The idea behind this is to give more insight into what's going on in the future with the equipment programs. And our first program forecast will cover military vehicles, and we expect that to have that ready in March.
So there you have it. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks, Helen.
So to find out more, you can email plus@shephardmedia.com or visit our website. I'm here with Tim Martin, Air Domain reporter here at Shephard Media, who last week attended the Asia Defence Expo and Conference, or more commonly known as ADECS, in the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. Tim, you and our Asia Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, filed a ton of copy and videos throughout the show. So for the benefit of the listeners, what were some of the key takeaways from the week?
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, it was my first time in Singapore and first time in Asia, actually, as it happens. And the conference itself did provide a fairly comprehensive insight into the security issues affecting the Asia-Pacific region. Throughout the week, we heard a lot about China and how it's developing military capabilities, particularly in areas of submarine technology and electronic warfare. EW, I guess, was one of the bigger themes of the conference itself, with many speakers talking about the erosion, I guess, of the West losing its advantage in that particular area. We also heard from one presenter at the conference who warned of the growing threat posed as the world rushes, headlong towards the Internet of Everything. I also had a chance to speak with the Royal Australian Air Force and Air Commodore Craig Heap, who was telling me a little bit about plans for the Triton and the MUM-T capabilities that it'll have eventually with Poseidon. But aside from program developments, I also spoke with Simon Williams, who's the chairperson of Clarion, the organisers of the event. And so here's what he had to say about the security issues in the Asia-Pacific region.
Well, this being the fourth in the series now that we've been running here in Singapore of the Asia Defence Exhibition and Conference Series, we've stabilised around the four main themes, which is undersea defence warfare, electronic warfare, military simulation, and maritime patrol. There is, of course, a great deal of sensitivity here in Asia when discussing a number of the issues and security challenges that are in the region, as there is a sense that actually they're seeking local solutions to what are essentially local problems. And a number of the things that we might perceive from the West as being of significance are actually not seen as being of that greater significance here in Asia, whereas some of the issues such as disaster relief we see as almost an ancillary activity in Western Europe and the United States and North America, and indeed in South America, whereas here, actually, as it's colloquially known within the Ring of Fire, where there's a huge amount of geological and geothermal activity with earthquakes, volcanoes, and tsunami as pretty regular occurrences and at huge scale. These are really big issues that actually challenge the infrastructure of any nation, and the military and the security services are really critical as first responders in those instances.
So that's a good scene setter there from Simon. But you mentioned at the beginning, Tim, concerns surrounding electronic warfare. I mean, what were people discussing about EW during the event, on the show floor, in the conferences?
Yes, Helen, that's a great question. We spoke with Dr. Tom Withington, an EW analyst, about the EW challenges within the region, and we'll hear from him in a few moments. But first, I sat down with Gordon Arthur, our Asia-Pacific editor, to ask about what caught his eye.
Tim, there's been some really good sessions, so I'd like to mention one of them, and it was by Professor David Stupples, who's the Director of Electronic Warfare Systems Research at City University of London. And he was talking about the threat posed by countries such as Russia, China, North Korea in this modern information era. So he talked about the Internet of Everything, which is the next stage basically after the Internet of Things, whereby data and intelligence and information is stored in networks. So of course all an enemy has to do is be able to hack into that by stealing passwords, etc., and there's all sorts of damage that they can do. Professor Stupples actually made the claim that enemies can destroy countries entire countries by cyber alone. So he talked about the risks and the vulnerabilities that the West has as increasingly devices, he said 100 billion by next year, devices will be connected to the internet. So there are huge things and to consider for people.
Well, yesterday and this morning have been an absolutely fascinating insight into the EW challenges within the region. I think there's two main themes that we're seeing at play, the first one of which is China's increasingly muscular strategic posture in the region and what that really is meaning for the regional actors, particularly not only Singapore, but also countries perhaps further afield, Japan, South Korea, etc. The second major theme that is coming out is really to do with spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum as a whole, and the pressure on that spectrum. Obviously in the Asia Pacific, we're dealing, like much of the rest of the world, with a region where the proliferation of wireless devices increases year on year. This means more and more people need bandwidth, and that means also less bandwidth has become available to the military. But also the other major challenge is how do you find that signal of interest within all of this electromagnetic noise? And that is creating challenges not only for the military, but also on the industrial side with how do the technology providers meet that challenge and then address it. You've got the twin challenges, I think, of on one hand there is the perceived threat from China. What is interesting is also the absence. North Korea, for instance. We heard a lot about North Korea last year, obviously President Trump's visit and the flowering, if you like, of a form of diplomacy going on there. But nevertheless, North Korea probably does remain a threat, maybe perhaps more of a land threat than a maritime threat, for instance. But then there's also the other approach which is going on, which is really how do the regional partners in this area, how do they keep up with the US? The US is still the dominant security guarantor in the region, so how are we all making sure that we can continue to operate with the US, particularly within the spectrum, to ensure that all-important freedom of maneuver in the electromagnetic spectrum. So that's another dimension, if you like, to the Chinese question that's there.
So that was EW analyst Tom Withington there, who also contributes for Shephard Media, covering all the EW challenges. Now, Tim, you mentioned submarine technologies as being one hot topic during the event.
So that's right, Helen. The capability of Asia's submarine fleet is currently increasing, even if the total number of hulls is expected to taper off within a few years. But I also spoke with an academic who focuses on Chinese naval warfare, and interestingly he was saying that low-tier manufacturers of submarines are increasing throughout China, which is obviously having a knock-on effect to their expertise within that particular area. Boats are being introduced that have better quieting technologies, longer endurance and more sophisticated combat management systems and more potent standoff weapons. I also spoke to Gordon about Asian submarine development, and here's a little taste of what he had to say.
So rounding off the conversation on news, Gordon, was there any kind of final items that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, earlier today I went to another session which was in the underwater defence technology conference section, and there was a professor from Singapore, Colin Koh, who's a research fellow here in Singapore, and he was talking about the proliferation of submarines. Now, Tim, if I was to ask you which country in Asia has the most submarines, what would you say?
South Korea, perhaps? Or
Right, well, it's actually North Korea, so you're not too far away. But most people would not consider North Korea to be a submarine power. The thing is, North Korea has many mini submarines. So if you just count the number of submarine hulls, it doesn't really give you an accurate picture of which countries have capable submarine fleets. So I actually asked Colin about the People's Liberation Army Navy, which is the largest submarine operator in Asia. And he was saying, if you're referring to nuclear-powered submarines, the number of hulls in China is growing. If you're talking about conventional submarines, the number is actually decreasing. And China is actually a good case study for what's happening in Asia, because Professor Koh believes that the number of submarines in the region will actually taper off within the few years. The reason being that countries are moving towards bigger, more capable submarines, and therefore they're also more expensive. So the number is actually going to drop in coming years. So I found that particularly interesting.
Gordon, thanks so much.
Our Asia Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, there. So, Tim, outside of the conference programme, who did you get to speak to on the show floor, and what were some of the concerns that they raised with you?
Yep, so on the show floor, I had the chance to speak with key military commanders. So I've chosen a couple of clips that highlight that. Obviously, the US Navy is a major maritime force in the Asia Pacific region, and it continues to work with allied nations to better develop strong international and interoperable partnerships. And that really was the theme from Captain Matthew Jerby, Commander Destroyer Squadron 7. And in this next clip, he's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So United States Navy in Southeast Asia, one of our primary goals is to continually work with our partners and allies, both to improve our interoperability and our ability to share information, in this case, maritime domain awareness. Some of the great successes that we've had is this marks the 25th anniversary of the CARET exercise season. So this is one of the longest ongoing maritime exercise series that we have. It's been very successful. Every year we build upon the successes of the years before that, and we continually become more complex and more advanced exercise scenarios. The other great success that we've had is we continue to build trust and our ability to share information and to expand our maritime domain awareness with our partners and allies. Going forward, some of the challenges that we see, the world's becoming more complex. Challenges are becoming more intertwined, both in the maritime domain and other areas. So it's critical that we continue to have these continual exercises, engagements with our partners and allies, and to improve upon and build trust, interoperability, and ability to share information in the maritime domain. The world is getting smaller, so to speak. So moving forward, it's all the more important to work with our partners and allies and to look downrange, continue to build that trust, and the best way that we're going to be able to tackle the challenges is together and by continuously engaging with exercises and other engagements to build the confidence that we can tackle these problems together.
The other interview I wanted to touch on, Helen, was my chat with Air Commodore Craig Heap, who's the commander of the Royal Australian Air Force's Surveillance and Response Group. So he was explaining how the P-8A Poseidon and the unarmed Triton, the MQ-4C, will be able to work together to benefit Australia and the wider region. So Triton is to come online, or will be with the Australian Air Force in 2023, and operational potentially from 2024 and 2025. So it's quite an interesting project from the Air Force's perspective, and certainly in the manned-unmanned team environment, it'll increase their capabilities quite significantly. So this is Air Commodore Craig Heap talking on that.
So the introduction into service of the P-8A Poseidon has been tremendous for Australia. It's now taken over fully the maritime role completely from the venerable P-3 that I flew many hours on. It has performed superbly well, and we look forward as we gain more capability, we train more crews, we gain more platforms to fully taking over the role in that space. We have found a number of challenges, but those challenges have been minimalistic and they've all been overcome. In particular, the fact the aircraft is realistically a flying computer, which is very different. Although there was technology on the AP3C and it was very good, it was pretty high end. This is a flying computer that'll be consistently upgraded and spirally developed over its time through our cooperative program with the United States Navy, which has been a tremendous outcome. The Triton and P-8 are part of a wide area surveillance system and called part of a family of systems really that are conducting very similar roles, but each of them optimised in a different area. The Triton certainly optimised for long range, persistence, reach, tremendous fidelity in its sensors to enable it to locate assets, to locate contacts at extreme range, and then inform a response, which is really the P-8's role, is to respond to whatever the Triton can find. So it works across all the traditional anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface unit warfare, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, general maritime and overland intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance collection, as well as being complementary to search and rescue. one of the key things I think people will need to know is that the Triton will be a tremendous asset in the initial response for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and also in a search and rescue scenario, given its range, the fact it's going to have tremendous presence, and that it can guide, along with that multi-mission, that manned-unmanned teaming concept, can guide a bunch of manned assets in with a response to certain situations.
Thanks, Tim, for that insight into ADECS 2019 in Singapore. We wanted to take a short break into the podcast to tell you about Shephard Studio. Studio is our branded content offering which gives industry a more creative way to tell their stories. Shephard Studio works closely with companies and event organisers across the aerospace and defence industry to provide bespoke co-branded solutions. Whether it is support of a particular campaign, content surrounding a major trade show, or bringing Studio on board to more effectively tell a company story. Studio has already been adopted by many of the major defence primes. If you're interested in learning more about Studio projects and how they could benefit your company, please contact us at www.shephard.studio. I'm now joined again by Beth Maundrell, Deputy Land Editor. Beth, you managed to escape Shephard Towers and met with Lockheed Martin at one of their UK facilities. Can you share a bit of details about that visit?
Of course, Helen. So I spent the day this week at Amped Hill in Bedfordshire at the Lockheed Martin UK site. Now, there's quite a few things going on up there, and one of the biggest is that it is the manufacturing site for the new turrets for some variants of the British Army's ADECS family of vehicles, as well as the new turrets that will go on the Warrior IFV as part of the Warrior Capability Sustainment Programme. Now, during the visit, I was lucky enough to have a look around the manufacturing site. And at the moment, as we speak, there are indeed ADECS turrets that are currently being built. And in fact, in 2018, Lockheed Martin delivered around 17 of these turrets to General Dynamics, which is the vehicle manufacturer of the ADECS. And of course, more turrets are to be delivered soon. However, part of the manufacturing site sits rather quiet as the company is still awaiting a full rate production decision from the UK MOD regarding the turrets for the Warrior Capability Sustainment Programme. Now, we're still not sure when this will be exactly, but following my visit, I've been in touch with the MOD, who hopefully will be able to shed some light on the timeline for that. Now, the Capability Sustainment Programme was discussed last year by the MOD at the DVD event in Millbrook. So the British Army are keen for it to go forward. And obviously the company, Lockheed Martin, has put a huge amount of investment into its manufacturing facility at Amped Hill as kind of a bit of a show of its commitment to the project. So they're also keen to get things started from what I can tell. Testing of the turret is, however, ongoing. Another thing that Lockheed Martin develops at the Amped Hill site is the Skykeeper Battlespace Management and Surveillance System for ground-based air defence. Now, I won't go into too much detail about this because I spoke to Graham Forsyth, who is the head of the product portfolio, and he told me about the system, how it works, and in particular why it's relevant to today's ground-based air defence landscape.
Thanks, Beth. Essentially, we would call it a universal BMC4I system. So essentially, it's capable to manage a battle space, but effectively any battle space through all of the tiers and domain, whether it be air, ground, or subsurface. For us, Skykeeper is the cutting-edge solution. It's scalable, it's fully networked with an open architecture, interfacing or having the ability to interface with ground sensors, air surveillance assets, to deliver a situational awareness second to none, essentially a source of truth. We do that by actually integrating various sensor feeds, either as correlated or through a fusion engine, and sometimes via a tactical data link such as Link 16. We ourselves benefit from years of real-life data, having fielded 2 systems via the UK MOD, LEAP and ASNW. So we benefit from all of that user interface, experience, feedback that has actually allowed us to move forward and really hit the spot as far as customer requirements. What else can I say? Our aim essentially is to bring that single source of truth, but equally through an effective use of the human-man interface, to take a lot of the nugatory work away from the user. They're busy enough, it's complicated enough, and so we aim to give them solutions in the shorter, most effective time manner.
And in terms of the system, what are some of the latest developments that Lockheed Martin has been working on?
Yeah, I mean, this field being IT related is no different to a lot that goes on in our home lives. So we're looking at smaller, more flexible form factor. So essentially shrinking the solution. That in essence will allow the solution to become more deployable, more effective, and become more a part of the wider population's use. Through the publish and subscribe architecture, as mentioned before, we can actually turn off modules and turn on different modules. So we actually future-proof the system by bringing in modules into that overarching architecture. Recently, we've been working on directed energy, so lasers of the future weapons. And that's really because our processing power, our decision-making power is of a speed, is of a magnitude that can essentially look to affect swarms as an example.
And you mentioned some of the experience you've had with customers with previous systems. How does the Skykeeper system itself meet customer needs today?
Really, it goes back to that architecture. It goes back to those lessons learned. So as I said, it's tailorable, it's scalable, it's modular, all of the good buzzwords. But actually, we're now seeing that central to MOD policy, especially in the UK, we're looking at incremental uplifts rather than actually the big procurement activities. So the investment in activity or programs that are already fielded. As I say, LEAP is out there. It's extremely busy as a system in providing access to a recognized air picture for Army assets. And what we're doing at the moment through experimentation is looking to take that forward and evolve that as the threat evolves, as doctrine evolves. Skykeeper achieves that, and we're looking to proliferate the use of that Skykeeper system.
So there you mentioned the threats. So looking at the wider context of air and missile defence, what are some of the main threats that modern militaries are facing today?
I mean, clearly, as we see in the press time and time again, UAVs, the whole counter-UAS subject, whether that be swarms, whether that just be almost the asymmetric nature of what people have to affect such a cheap, commercially available drone. So that's a big topic at this point in time. But equally, technology seems as though it is leading in a lot of these situations. So we heard around the legal framework not necessarily being clear enough for people to actually counter the UAVs because of it being an up-and-coming threat set. So the legal framework, doctrine, the actual education within the customer set more widely, that's something that we're spending a lot of time to actually educate and help. Aligned with that, in today's period of austerity, if you call it, or actually maximising the use of assets that are there, we're actually looking to bring a mass to the battle space. So typically that could be through additional assets, but equally, and we're finding that through the use of Skykeeper, we can interact with the more digital assets that are coming on board, and we can actually look to link them together more effectively, more efficiently, I should say, pretty well through the growing arena or domain of information maneuver.
And finally then, what is next for Lockheed Martin and the Skykeeper capability, and perhaps what's next for the wider air defence community? Sure.
So 2019 looks to be as busy globally as 2018 was. We will find ourselves, we are undertaking many pursuits at this point in time through Europe and further afield. GBAD is, just as counter-US, is probably one of the top 3 activities within most national forces at this time, as the global politics, now play a part, and we're interested in different arenas. So really huge amount of customer interaction, products such as Skykeeper, companies such as Lockheed. Obviously a big part of what we do is shaping future requirements and actually offering that service that probably a lot of forces haven't actually got in terms of what is going on out in the field. So that's what we're going to be doing a lot of activity around experimentation. So really in an arena such as this, it's only doctrine will change and threat sets will change and usage will change, not by classroom activities or two-dimensional paper activities, but actually getting out there and seeing how the user has to work, the environment that they have to work within, and really making sure that we can adapt as the threat set changes. Internally to Lockheed, in the systems such as Skykeeper, as I said earlier on, our leverage, the quality that we bring is actually managing the human-man interface, bringing in algorithms or machine learning to actually make that user more effective. So I know our software team is always busy and quite often out there, but they'll be working through their list of innovations on how we just make the warfighter more effective.
Well, many thanks for that overview, Graham, and we look forward to seeing the developments of 2019.
So welcome to this week's Industry Voice. This is the segment of the show that features our sponsor, Namo. I'm Tony Skinner, SVP of Content here at Shephard Media, and I'm joined by Andra Londa, who's the SVP of Communications for Namo. So Andra, this week we're going to be talking about test and development activities, which is in the light of the release last week of the annual report from the Office of the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, so DOT&E, that's the organisation in the US, as well as, I understand, some testing activities that you've been doing yourselves at Namo. So in terms of testing and development, I mean, what's on your mind this week?
Well, I just wanted to actually give that report a little bit as a recommendation to the listeners. It's usually not something that you would read unless you would have a specific requirement to do so for your work. But for everyone who's interested in the defense world, I would actually recommend having a look at that report because it provides a pretty unique snapshot, an insight into how the world of testing actually happens. Of course, you have to read it with that in mind. This is a report that's written specifically to, list everything that didn't work for a year. I was first exposed to it when I was working on the F-35 from the government side here in Norway before. And it's a very dense document, but it's also just shows the complexity of it, the scope of these tests. And and like you said, I was also struck by when I was talking to some of our test guys here in Norway this week, where I've been trying to inform local community here about some bigger tests that we're going to be doing on 120 main battle tank ammunition this week. And whenever we do that, we tend to let a local community know because it might actually rattle their windows a little bit, and just to keep them a little bit on our side in the longer term. But it's just so much testing going on, and once we start moving towards the larger trade shows later this year, and all the technology that's on display there, it's just hours and hours of testing and data points and planning that's behind it. It's just fascinating to look at.
I mean, it's one of those areas that even for those of us that report on the defence industry, on a day-to-day basis, this is one of those areas that we don't tend to hear a lot about throughout the year. I mean, do you think the industry kind of needs to raise the profile of this sort of part of the industry?
Well, I definitely think there's a big potential there. Obviously, there are some things that we can't talk about. The customer owns the product, owns the results, owns everything that comes out of there. But we also do a considerable amount of research development on our own. We have an objective here in Namo, at least, that we're going to spend about 10% of our revenue every year on research and development. Much of it is customer funded, of course, but we do have a considerable amount that we do our own as well. and investing in our technology. And yes, we definitely could be talking about that a lot more, and hopefully we will be able to. But I think that applies to many of our colleagues across the defense and aerospace world. There's just so much going on there that I think will be interesting to many of those working, maybe not in the defense sector themselves, but adjacent to it. Everything from congressional aides who are just interested in what we're doing in technology to former military personnel who's just interested in what's going on in the defense world, or reporters who are maybe not working day to day in the defense realm, but are looking for interesting stories or something they want to bring to a greater audience. And that's definitely something we could be helping with.
I mean, and obviously, you know, when you reflect on this, you know, these kind of activities, I mean, this is something that's going to establish, you know, credibility in the equipment. It's going to give the operator of the equipment the confidence that they can use the kit. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a pretty key area all around.
Yeah, hopefully it gives them still some confidence, but I think what we also have to be prepared for then is to show a little bit ugly side of it, because when you test, you don't test when you know that everything is going to be fine. Then it's just like, then you're doing a demonstration. Real development test, that doesn't always work out, and you have to be able to show a little bit of the downsides too. That's a little bit what, for instance, SpaceX did when they put out the video of how not to land an orbital rocket booster, which is basically just a minute or two of crashes and big explosions. We have those too. Things don't always work out. We have big bangs that don't really go the way they were expected to, but that's what we do testing. We want to learn from it. We want to be able to evaluate those results and to put it back into making a better product, because at the end of the day, our goal is to make sure that big bang, unintentional one, doesn't happen once we put it into the hands of our soldier or pilot or sailor who is actually be using this on a critical mission. That's why we do it, and that's why we spend so much time on it as well.
Sure. Well, we look forward to seeing that video of big bangs that didn't go the way they should when you're allowed to release them. So, Andre, thanks for your time, and that's been this week's Industry Voice.
This episode of Shephard's Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Nammo. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please head over to shepherdmedia.com to access all our news stories and subscriber content. We'd love to hear what you thought of the podcast, so please do subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or other podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.